books. And I know you didn't bring me on here to plug your service, but the cool thing
Yeah.
about books is that if you think about how we bonded with our caretakers and the people that we love, or how we discovered things when we were children, it was through story, and story came through books.
Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome back. It's your favorite time of the week. It's my favorite time of the week. It's time for Leaders Talk. As usual, I am your intrepid host, Andrew Dupie, head of communications here at Leaders Brands. And today I have a very special guest. As David Letterman said, a guest who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Very briefly, and then we'll get to know him a little bit better. So today I have on Doug C. Brown. He is the CEO of Sales Strategies. And this man has a career that, if you can believe it, extends all the way back to when he was 3 years old. And since that time, I'm assuming very rapidly, he's become a sales revenue growth expert, entrepreneur, business consultant, and author. Doug, welcome, sir.
Hey, hey, Andrew.
So I've teased him with the 3-year-old thing here.
Well, I started laughing when you said that because when I turned 50, I started counting all over again. So I'm only 12 now. So that's the
Awesome. Yeah, I've reset a few times myself. But yeah, so tell our audience a little bit about ourselves, those that might not be able to get to know you yet.
Yeah, well, I did start working at the age 3, as you were saying. I
There
worked for
you
my
go.
dad's business. I swept floors. I made 25 cents a week. Woohoo. And by the age, it was under 6, but if you hit your 6th birthday, you were kind of late on this. They used to take us and bring us out in front of the clientele, and we would actually sell. They were teaching us how to sell when I was very young. And I loved it. I was making 25 cents a week at that point. Not a week, 25 cents an hour at that point. And then what I realized was, I sold this part. My dad had a machinery repair company, industrial machinery repair company, electrical. And so I'd have a part for $10 and I'd sell it for 20. And my little brain one day, wait a minute, I just made in like 6 minutes what I normally make all week long, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm like, I kind of like this. And well, long story short, I started embracing this and everything. And I'm like, well, how do I like leverage, right? Create leverage. So over my life, I've done 35 businesses. And I've tried to leverage through most of those businesses. And uh, sales and selling was one of the greatest forms of leverage.
Yeah.
And then, building sales teams and helping them sell also created leverage because what they would do, I would get a piece of that off that process. So most of my life, I have been focused into selling. And what I realized is business is pretty simple, right? It's money out, money in equals something. So if you can make that money in much larger than the money out, you end up doing good things. And so, I've been in the military. I was a professional musician. I've tried all kinds of things. People used to think I was crazy when I was younger because that little entrepreneurial brain on trying to leverage through and
Yeah.
create things. So they used to be like, what is this kid doing? He's trying to be a professional musician. Why is he doing this? Right. And so because I realized that music also is leverage, it motivates people, it makes them move, emotes people, right? And so there's different types of leverage. It doesn't have to just be financial leverage. I mean, heck, you see that in politicians today. They're moving people in a direction, and we go, why are we going in that direction? But a lot of people are going in that direction, right? So
Yeah.
music to me was also something like that. So that's kind of a bit of a background on me.
Okay. I mean, that's an interesting point when you come into this, the idea of leverage, because you're right. Every single negotiation, one point person or the other needs to have some kind of leverage, or else it's not a negotiation. It's just I give a demand and you give in, or I don't care about what you're asking me. So what are some ways in which people can create leverage in situations in business, sales, just or just in general?
Yeah, well, leverage, if you think about it as effectiveness and efficiency,
Right.
right? The more effective you can be, you'll gain leverage. And the more efficient you are at that, i.e., you have less labor, less time, less energy, less money into the thing, and you can still get the effectiveness out of it. That's also a form of leverage. So that's
Okay.
kind of like the formula for it. And, as I had mentioned, getting a sales team, for example, is leverage. If you can get them high performing, that's better leverage. If
Mhm.
you can get them to work for commission only versus paying out base salaries, in most cases, in the beginning, especially, there's really good leverage because if you can get them to be outbounding sales where you don't have
Mhm.
to pay them, for example, until they actually bring the sale in, then that's really good leverage. You've got multiple people out on the street, if you will, feet on the street, bringing products and services in. So the ultimate form of that type of leverage is creating an independent agent program or an independent sales team
Right.
whereby, and we did this. We built a company. We got it up to $30 million. We had eventually we brought in some internal salespeople, but we only had two, right? And so people were out there earning money off of what we were doing. And therefore, they were able to bring in business for us, and we were earning money on that. And we paid a straight percentage. So we didn't have taxes and hiring and firing and all of the headaches that come along. So again, how do you improve the effectiveness and how do you improve the efficiency of that effectiveness? And those
Yeah.
two factors will give you leverage in anything. You can look at that on any, I mean, take any operational process that's in a company, it will work. Human resources, it will work. Uh, you know, Another form of leverage that's kind of popular today, Andrew, is, people are starting to use fractional officers in their company, for example, right? So they might have a chief marketing officer that's a fractional officer or a chief, outsourced CFO or a
Mhm.
CEO, right? And and the benefit of doing that is you're contracting with this person, but you don't have the overhead of the process and you can easily fire them, right? There's not you're not going to get into a human resources nightmare by hiring fractional people
Right.
because they're contracted. Great. If they don't, you're not going through all that. You don't need recruiters. You don't need all of this stuff. So there's a lot of lever process. So that's another form of leverage that we've utilized.
Yeah, and that's kind of the internal leverage that you build by with your own teams. How do you build leverage though with outside? So, well, that's all well and good. So I know how I'm going to inspire my team. I know I'm going to do things internally, but let's say I'm sitting down in a negotiation with somebody. I really want them to buy my product, or just like what's that relationship like? How does all of that end up working towards being able to close that kind of deal or move that kind of business forward?
Yeah, well, people buy for three reasons. One,
Yeah.
they buy because they're trying to solve a problem. There's some problem, some challenge. Two, they're trying to gain some opportunity. In three, they have a goal, right? So, I mean, your company helps, people who write books become bestsellers, right?
Right. Yeah, and usually for business. Yeah, for leverage. That's why I'm kind of leading with
Exactly,
that.
right? It's a
Yeah,
form of leverage.
yeah,
A book is a interactive business card. It's to me, that's right. So like I have books, people read them. I don't even have to explain what I do most of the time because it's in the book. And so when they're reaching out, they're a far more qualified client or potential client than if they didn't know who I was because they've read my books or and sometimes people are even holding my book in their hand or whatever. And they're saying, listen, I read this and I wanted to ask, questions about this. So it's a form of leverage, but people buy for three reasons. So it's, what a book, for example, why, they might be buying a book to become a bestseller because that's a goal,
Yeah.
right? And so now at the negotiation table of the sale, how do I help them win and how do I win? How do I help them win, someone else win, and how do I win? Right?
Yeah.
That's what we need to be focused on in selling because, I think Zig Ziglar said this, you help enough people, you'll get what you want, right? That type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I think negotiation as for a lot of people is kind of a word that they're a little, they feel it's a little negative because they feel somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose in a
Yeah.
negotiation, right?
Yeah.
It's
That's not.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, I come from a military background, so military negotiations is how do we
Yeah.
solve.
Unconditional surrender grant.
Right, exactly. And so, the negotiation side, if we think win-win-win when we're sitting down with someone, then what we're trying to do is either resolve that problem, help them get that opportunity. That's what they want as well. If we can do that and they're playing win-win, then it's a beautiful place, right? So
Right.
if not, you're going to hear objections from that person over and over and over. So people buy for those three reasons, but they buy for a business return on investment or a personal return on investment or both. So while
Right.
we're having that negotiation, we must keep in mind, what do they want? What do they need? What do they fear? What do they desire? What are they looking to get from a business perspective? What are they looking to get from a personal perspective?
Mhm.
And a lot of people, Andrew, don't focus on both. They'll focus mostly on the business return and they miss the critical human component of what they're looking for on the personal side. And that's why a lot of times the negotiations don't go win-win. They go, somebody's want to win, somebody's going to lose, because it becomes about the feelings and the emotions that person isn't getting that they want.
Right. That's a really, really good insight. That's actually something that we do internally with our sales teams is we work on finding out why someone wants the book. I mean, we understand the business part of it, and that can all come as it comes on later. But when very first engagement, someone like say someone talks to me about beginning to actually work with us, it's a process of asking, well, I want to get into why you want to do this. I want to get into how long you've tried to been do this. What problem is this going to solve for you? What's the damage that is being done by not having this? And that approach is much more effective to actually getting into somebody's mind and having them understand and even to themselves reveal why they really want to do what you're basically asking them to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of authors and, many of them, they'll say things like, well, I want to get the book out for exposure for my business,
Yeah.
which makes sense. But when we dig deep down and we ask, questions that make their eyebrows raise up, and we ask the questions of curiosity, and we
Mhm.
really listen, we'll find many of these even famous authors who I happen to know on a personal level, so I can say this. Um, they want higher repute. They
Yeah.
want a different standing in society, right?
Mhm.
That's the personal return on investment that they're seeking. So if you dig into why do you want higher repute, they'll actually give you the reasons why. And
Mhm.
those conversations, a lot of people are afraid to have those. And so,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that, right, that's the place you can gain massive leverage in a selling scenario because we're actually dealing with the things that emotionally move them,
right.
you know. And so once we can get that moving in, and then we look at what I call the buying seesaw, right? If you imagine, when you were a kid, you probably at one point in your life, folks, you probably got on a seesaw. One person gets on one side, one person gets on the other side, and you're kind of going up and down on the playground. Some people call them teeter totters or whatever they.
Yeah, yeah, that was what we called
Um,
them when we were kids, teeter totters. Yeah.
yeah. But on one side of the teeter totter and on the other side of the teeter totter, one side is fear and one
Mhm.
side is buying confidence. So we want buying confidence to be at the top. So we want fear to be way low and buying confidence way high,
Yeah.
right? And so if it's in the middle, if you've ever had a friend and you two were like equal weight or whatever, and you're kind of in the middle, you can't get the seesaw to go up or down, without trying to like, okay, you jump up and I'll bounce down. And, you got to get them to
Yeah,
do that type of thing, right? To get it going. But if fear is so high or higher than buying confidence, you're going to get objections, stalls,
right.
ghosting, all of that stuff that happens. So we take the whole formula and we look at it and say, okay, if they buy for these, to solve a problem, gain a goal, or get an opportunity, and then we have business criteria and personal criteria involved. And now we look at that teeter-totter and we say, how do we get fear to be low and buying confidence to be high?
Mhm.
That in itself, a formula gives you leverage, because
Yeah.
if we're talking all about that consistency in the conversation, you know, uh, then that's where you end up with win-win selling, or win-win-win selling in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And that's I think a very important point that you make right there by mentioning fear, because one thing that I've run into as a salesman in my life, I've heard a lot of objections. That you've got the money objection, you've got the time objection, you've got there's a whole book that you go off of. But I've always found that fear is the one that is actually driving almost every single one of
Mm-hmm.
those. If you
Mm-hmm.
really get down to it, all of those objections become really a smokescreen to really get down to the idea that it's fear that you've got to overcome more than anything else. And if you beat that, you're pretty much already pre-beating everything else that might come in.
Yeah, fear's so I wrote a book on objections, and
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah.
so thank you for
Pick
that
your brain on there.
that soft plug. I appreciate that. It's called Win-Win Selling: How to Unlock the Power of Profitability by Resolving Objections. There's my shameless plug.
Oh,
Um,
don't worry. We'll give you another chance later too.
and you go into the psychology and philosophy of that, and it's all about how to resolve objections versus trying to crush them, versus trying to get into that metaphorical arm lock, right? And
Yeah.
you're absolutely on spot on. Every objection can be traced back to fear. Now, some people will call that discomfort, right? Well, discomfort's fear, you know?
Yeah.
And so, or it might be a feeling and then it manifests into fear. Like, we get a little pain in our chest up by our shoulder, and we're like, then we start thinking, oh my gosh, is this maybe a heart attack, or is what's going on? Or like, why am I having this? Right? Immediately the fear starts to kick in. Well, people in buying, they are weighing criteria to get, whether it's fearful or buying confidence. And so they look at things in order of priority for them. And we want to know what that order of priority is. And typically it comes down into four or five, basic things, which is their value perception of what is value to them, their value perception of what is service, convenience, price is certainly a consideration in all selling, no matter what any sales training course tells you. Price is a factor. Now, people do buy on value, but they determine part of that value by the price.
Right.
And so, there's those type of criteria. Selection is also another type of thing that they look at for value, right? Is there too many? Does it confuse me? Geez, I want an ice cream and I walk up to the stand and there's 142 flavors. Which one do I pick? Right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I want the coconut thing. No, maybe the funky monkey, oh my gosh, and you start getting in this battle and you're like, and you're getting closer and closer to the line where they're going to ask you what you want. You're not really sure. That is fear really manifesting itself in
Yeah.
a small way. So if we take that maybe crazy analogy and we apply that to I don't know, buying something, a manufacturer, or buying, I'm going to become an author and I want to get a book service, right? If we're feeling that fear coming into the process, we as human beings are going to do mainly one thing: try to protect ourselves.
Yes.
And that's where we're going to see objections. That's where we're going to see stalls. And all of the things that happen where salespeople are going, why are they not talking to me? This is so logical. It makes sense. They're going to
Mhm.
save $500,000 a year. We're going to charge them $10,000. Like the ROI is crazy on this thing. Why are they not saying yes? And it's because you missed something, folks. You missed
Yeah.
something in the personal life. And I'm bringing that scenario up because that literally happened to me early in my career. I literally could save somebody $500,000 a year. And I just asked for a percentage of it because I would do all the work for it for free. And 3 years later, they were on the same contract, spending the additional $500,000. And I finally went to the person and I asked him, in the first year, I went to him and I said, listen, this makes no sense to me. And he said this to me. He goes, Doug, listen, I'm an employee of this company. I negotiated that contract. If I go back and tell my CEO that I now can save another $500,000 a year, because I already saved about $500,000 a year now. But if I go back and say, hey, I screwed up, I'm probably going to lose my job. And there was the fear. And so
Yeah.
I was like, but Dan, we could have spun it that you did a great job and your, your spidey sense kicked in that there might be an extra, few percentage points you left on the table. So you called in an expert to help you. And the expert, we didn't even have to pay up front. And so we did this and, I gained another 40% because the expert was going to take 10%. And look, boss, I just saved the company another $400,000 a year.
Yeah.
And he went, oh, never thought about that. But that wasn't Dan's fault. That was Doug's fault, early on in my career, right? So I didn't unearth what that was. And so there's silent objections too.
Yeah.
And so now the other thing about objections, Andrew, on fear is they come and they manifest from our childhood
Mhm.
and we bring them all the way through our lives. And, we're usually they usually manifest in a way we've been trying to protect ourselves early on, or something we very much revered. Like, if we grew up in a negotiation household, for example, and I've seen people do this, it's crazy, right? They close the sale and then they renegotiate the sale to open it up because they were taught to keep trying to bring down the price and widen the
Yeah.
margin, even though it's a good deal. I actually saw a real estate agent actually blow out a $4.2 million sale on a house this way. And I was sitting there listening to her and they got it closed and they said, yeah, we're ready to go. And she's like, well, we should talk about, the commission side of this a little more on her end to try to widen the margin for her. And they were like, forget it, I'm not buying this house. We're done, And so it manifests itself in different ways, but you're absolutely spot on. It's fear, comes from our childhood, could come from frames of social frames.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in an Italian household where everybody, speaks with their hands, you know.
Yeah, my grandmother's from Naples. I understand.
Okay. So, it's
Mine's
like
on.
it's like my household when maybe yours too with your grandmother. It's like everybody's like having like it looks like you're sitting on a table and everybody's having like a sit down karate fight. Like they're moving
Yeah.
their hands all over the place, right? So, but that in itself could be intimidating to certain cultures,
Yep, it can be.
right? So we've got to be aware of all these triggers that happen and then reduce that fear, improve the buying confidence, and those two criteria based on those three buying criteria.
Yeah, and that's why I love books. That'll be my extra plug for books because I think that books get you in the door and already reduce that fear factor because they're already starting to build the trust factor. Because you're not a stranger if you make a business deal or start working on a business deal that starts with them reading your book, whether it be 50 pages, 200 pages, 300 pages, whatever it is. They're going to have something that's already built between you that's going to reduce that fear factor of taking the risk because you already know that you're working with somebody that you can trust.
And to credit what you're saying or give credence more to it, we for many, many years built back end sales teams for companies. And
Yeah.
so we would literally go find the people, hire them, put them on many times for full commission, right? Depending on what we could get for lead flow, or for paid plus. And inevitably, when there were people that we would work with who had books, the sales team members, and I used to get on these calls all the time because I wanted to keep the pulse on what's going on, right? So, so you can't have a salesperson go, well, this doesn't work really well, but it is working really well. And they're just like, they don't want to do it type of thing.
Yeah.
And so inevitably the people who had books, we would hear, hey, I read this book here and then this book here of this particular author. And that's why I'm on this call, because in the book, they would start citing stuff like, I'm having this challenge that you brought up in chapter 3, the author brought up in chapter 3, right? So the great power and leverage of books is that that knowledge builds rapport, trust, respect, and then it doesn't necessarily have to be the author that's actually selling it, which gives them great form of leverage because it's transferable through the book. The book and the knowledge is actually the discussion point now versus the author themselves being the discussion point, or having to prove to that person, because the information is already, and it goes back to, I think, and please correct me because you know more about this than I would, but it's like advertising, right? It's like, seeing a commercial on television or whatever, you know who the Pillsbury Doughboy is, right? So like when you're gonna go buy, baking rolls or something and you walk by the Pillsbury Doughboy, you're like, oh, well, I trust this little character, it's
Yeah, you buy him over the other flowers. I mean, over King Arthur, which is a much better one. This dude down, but
right, right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that organic flour that's been milled, by pristine
yeah.
conditions. I'm not saying the Pillsbury Doughboy doesn't have pristine conditions, but I'm
Oh yeah,
saying,
still a great
you,
flower. Yeah,
it's like we buy that because we have a level of trust and familiarity, which is a
correct. Yeah,
form of lowering fear. This is why guys or gals, when they want to, ask someone out on a date and they don't know them, and they're apprehensive about going up and approaching her because they feel, I'll speak for a man's point of view, we're going to get rejected potentially. There's the fear.
yeah,
But if you're talking to her best friend and the best friend's going to want to introduce the two of you, the fear is lowered because the best friend is the conduit, and the best friend is now respected by the person that, say, I would want to get to know better. So that credibility, call it a referral, if you will, but that
yeah,
trust factor built in is now lowering the fear. And that's what books do. It gets the familiarity. And the cool thing about books, and I know you didn't bring me on here to plug your service, but the cool thing
yeah,
about books, is that if you think about how we bonded with our caretakers and the people that we love, or how we discovered things when we were children, it was through story, and story came through books. You have nighttime reading by the parent or the caretaker with the child, and you fall asleep listening to, in my case, Curious George, right? My parents used to read me Curious George books or different, and I loved Curious George books. And I love them today. In fact, I still have Curious George memorabilia today. That's how strong a book can be, and pull. But it's reality that when you write a book, you put yourself in a more expert positioning. And we always are taught to understand that experts are to be respected for the most part, right?
yeah.
You walk into a doctor's office, you don't usually walk into the doctor's office and go, listen, tell me what your GPA was, your grade point average through medical
Yeah,
school.
you're not gonna ask for a CV.
You don't do that, right? So you might walk into an author's office and ask them questions about the book, and hey, you said this, and I was wondering about this or whatever. But that's a form of curiosity to lead toward, gaining more knowledge for yourself, which is gratification, which is also lowering the fear with the answers that are coming there. So books are a really good medium. And if nothing else, I would tell people, it's one of the best calling cards that you can have. If you have a book, hand them the book with your business card versus just handing a business card. And again, I'm not here to plug your service. You didn't bring me on to do that, but
Yeah,
I will tell you that.
we're here to plug you. So, hey, I mean, we appreciate it. Well, I mean, that's just it. Most of our audience are people that are kind of fence sitters on whether they want to write or not. So, it's relevant to what they're looking for. Is the book the leverage that they want to have? And I think it's a good one.
Well,
It's worked for us.
our clients come to us for they want predictable, reliable, measurable revenue, right? I mean, sales
Yeah,
revenue. Positioning and alignment is part of that.
yeah,
And so positioning is how, you're perceived, the brand, if you will. Like, what are people thinking about you when you're not even around, or the promise delivered, right? And that's why books are good. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I published the book, Andrew. I
yeah.
have actually written 4 books, but my wife was actually the person who came to me and said, "Hey, you're doing all this writing. Why are you doing this?" I said, "Well, to help people." And she said, "Well, geez, can I read some of this?" And I said, this was, we were dating at the time. And she said, I said, "Sure." And I gave her the book, the Win-Win Selling, Unlocking the Power of Profitability's book. And she then came back and she said, "I read your book. It's really good." I said, "Well, that's great." And then she asked me a series of questions, 2 or 3 questions. And then I answered the questions. And she said, "Doug, why did you write the book again?" And I said, "Well, to help people." And she said, "Well, Doug, if you don't release the book, how are you ever going to help people?"
There you go.
And what I realized, Andrew, is she was using all of the stuff that I had written in the book to resolve my internal objection. And I was like, okay, so this is working on me. I got something here, right? And so I released the book. And again, folks, I'm not trying to plug this. I'm talking about sales here, right? It's about positioning. I have had
Yeah.
people come up to me and go, "I've read your book, and this really helped me." And, we've got reviews that are unscripted online. People just read the book and they post a 5-star review and said, "This is like laid out so logically. This guy knows what he's talking about," right? Blah, blah, blah. I've had people and clients actually call me and hire me based on the book. So my intention for writing the book was just to make my wife happy, right? But there's been so much the positioning that comes out of that people say, "Hey, this guy's an author," and authors 200-300 years ago were rock stars, and that rock star thing continues to keep coming today, right? Because if you have a book, it says you're smart, and if you're smart, you got to be an expert. And if it's well reviewed, you're definitely, the other people are saying you're an expert. So there's social proof and social credibility. So again, those of you who are sitting on the fence, I'm a sales guy. So those of you sitting on the fence, you know, why are you writing? Why do you want to be there? And how are you going to help people unless you release the book? I'll use my
Yeah.
wife's line, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. It helps no one while it's sitting on a shelf and
Right.
not going anywhere. All right. Well, Doug, speaking of plugging yourself, how can our audience find out more about you?
Well, they can just type in Doug C. Brown revenue growth or whatever. You'll find me on probably the first 8 to 10 pages. Um, but I've got a couple of things that I can do to get to know one another better. You can certainly check me out at LinkedIn at Doug Brown 123. You can send me an email at doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. You can call me on my cell phone, 832-549-4836. Please do not send me promotional text or emails. I would appreciate that. Um, I got a couple of things. One, I have developed a software. It's a software application specifically on follow-up. So how do you have meaningful, relevant, personalized, and automated follow-up? Because people drop the ball all the time on follow-up.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, it's well stated that 68% of sales that would have happened do not because of lack of follow-up, because the average person doesn't follow up on a lead once. Only 13% follow up three times or more, but 90% of the sales are actually made on the 4th to 21st contact on a cold lead.
Hmm.
So we put the put the stop to that problem, right? So things called Vibitno, and Vibitno in a Slavic term means you matter. And so if people are interested in that, I'd ask them to reach out for that. If they're interested in creating predictable revenue, we can help them with that. If they're interested in how to hire a sales team, I can help them with that. So if they reach out to me at any of those, Andrew, that would be great. And may I give a gift away?
Absolutely.
So we have a resource for you that you can actually figure out how you're doing in your marketing and your sales. And it's a series of questions that we have, and we affectionately call it here the checklist. Yeah, I know that's not a fancy name, but you can get that at ceosalesstrategies.com/checklist, and you can just go and download that. And we've had amazing feedback on that. People are like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was doing good here, but deficient here." So it's a really good resource for people. And if they want to check out Vibitno, which is the software, they can go to vibitno.com and they can read about it. It's not open for public release yet, but we're just starting to take on users. So they can reach out to me at the information before.
Excellent. All right. And ladies and gentlemen, all of that information is down below. I encourage you to check it out. As a salesperson, you know how I love follow up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all of our favorite part of the day, right? All right, Doug. Well, hey, it was a pleasure having you. We have a lot of really good information in this one. If possible, we can have you back in the future.
Oh, I'd love to come back. This was fun.
Perfect. Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Doug, and best of luck to you, sir.
You too, Andrew.